Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Hello and welcome to the Living Out podcast. We like to talk about the big issues of faith and sexuality. My name's Andy Robinson and I'm joined by others who like to talk about faith and sexuality, or actually just like talking. That's Ed Shaw and Anne Whitten. So Ed and Anne, today we're going to deal with the question, is it just me? Perhaps for those wondering whether they're all alone as they experience same-sex attraction. But as we think about that, I wanted to ask you a question first. Are there other areas of life where you think to yourself, is it just me? Any kind of niche hobbies or niche interests? Anything else you want to confess to whoever's listening to this?
Oh dear. I've got plenty of niche interests. It's whether I want to confess them or not. I really enjoy transport history. So I was a member of the London Transport Museum. I think somebody got it me for my birthday. And I went on this tour around the Acton depot to see loads of old buses and trains. And Ed is doing a face. That's rude. So yeah, I could see old buses and trains and maps and uniforms and stuff, which was amazing. It was like the experience of a lifetime. But I got there and it was all old men in anoraks, apart from me and my friend. So I sort of figured quite early on that I was not the normal demographic for that tour.
Excellent. Well, yeah, that's reassuring. Ed, anything you've got which might just be you?
Oh, I just love hearing about Anne's because it makes me just feel normal. That's no, I plastic cover all my books. As if I was a librarian, and actually, it's not just me. My dad does it as well, so it's a sort of genetic thing. So that is often a thing that's much mocked. But recently, a colleague, he had one of those tea explosions in his rucksack. If he plastic covered his books, the book would be in a better state than it is now.
Well, I mean, I was slightly embarrassed by mine, but I'm feeling better after listening to you two. So my niche thing is, to be honest, I like all sports, and included in that is bowls. So I will happily go and watch bowls. In fact, I actually went to watch the bowls at the Commonwealth Games when they were in Glasgow a few years ago, and the BBC Breakfast were live there and wanted to interview somebody in the crowd, and to be honest, I was the only one young enough to actually get to the interview position. So the only other time I've spoken to more than 1 million people, I was talking about bowls, which is slightly depressing. But I think after that, actually, experiencing same-sex attraction just feels fairly normal by comparison. So
I would mock you for your bowls enthusiasm, but I enjoy snooker, so
I'm with you.
I feel that's yes. Okay, we'll go to the World Championships next year then.
Sheffield, here we come. But our question today on the Living Out podcast is it just me? And I guess many of the questions we've looked at in this series could be asked by somebody who experiences same-sex attraction or somebody who doesn't. But I guess this is the kind of question that might be asked by somebody in the early stages of exploring their sexuality. That might be your position as you listen in. Is it just me? We want to try and help in this conversation and also give a guide as to how others can be useful and help as well. So, Ed and Anne, we've discussed in previous editions of this podcast, we're all roughly the same age. So maybe we're going back sort of 25 years or so, when I guess we were aware of our same-sex attraction, but probably weren't hugely public about it. So was this a question you experienced? Did you get to the place of saying, is this just me? And what did it feel like?
Well, as a teenager, which I think sadly is about 30 years ago, isn't it? Let's be honest. So I knew it wasn't just me in the sense that I knew in theory that there were people who were same-sex attracted out there, who were gay out there, because I read books voraciously as a teenager, and I read books which had gay characters in, and I was aware of people in history and in literature and elsewhere who were same-sex attracted. So in that sense, I knew it wasn't just me. And also, my parents and family upbringing, we talked about things like homosexuality. It was part of the sex education that my parents did with me. So again, I knew it wasn't just me. But I suppose at an experiential level, there was nobody else that I knew who was same-sex attracted. And of course, actually, I wouldn't have myself thought, oh, I'm same-sex attracted and I want to talk about this, because I was thinking, oh, hopefully this will disappear soon. And therefore, I don't really need to talk about it with anybody. So, yeah, it was an odd setup of, I knew I wasn't alone in theory. I was alone in practice. I wasn't talking about it. And as a result, I suppose, again, looking back, I was probably unhelpfully internalizing the questions and the stress and the guilt and the shame that came as a result of that.
Yeah, it was similar for me in that I kind of sought out stuff that spoke about sexuality. I did a lot of reading as well, so mine was like Radcliffe Hall and Jeanette Winterson and people like that, all the classics. So I kind of knew there were people out there for whom this was a real experience, but I didn't know anybody in my life. I went to a girls' school, and I thought there probably are other girls who feel the same way, but how do you find each other? The culture then wasn't very open. People didn't talk about it, so it did feel a bit like a guilty secret that I was holding. I remember sort of sneakily videotaping the lesbian kiss on Brookside. I think that was 94 or something. So there was very little sort of to help me feel less alone. So yeah, I did feel quite lonely and isolated, and wasn't really out. I did sneak off to a gay youth club, but it felt very much like that was not part of my normal life. And in my normal life, I had to sort of pretend to be something that didn't align with how I felt. So yeah, uni was my chance to pursue my gay identity. So yeah, I guess I wish I'd had someone that I could talk to who knew me. And I suspect people might have been more understanding than I expected. I just didn't want to take that risk, But I think in a lot of ways, culture is very different now to how it was back then. I think it is easier to be more open. It's still a vulnerable thing to do, but it's perhaps a bit more easy to share with somebody else how you're feeling.
And also, nobody today's heard of Brookside or videotapes.
I know, that really dates us, doesn't it? What's a VHS?
Yeah. But I think the funny thing is, you two are actually further on than me in that you're actually reading about it. I vividly remember I should get a book about this, but I'm so embarrassed to buy it that somebody might see me buying it and wonder why I was buying it. So, and of course, this was pre-internet days. So, I mean, obviously, these days people can check out really, helpful websites like Living Out, but, that wasn't an option then either. So yeah, I remember, I think, feeling very much alone. I think objectively I knew there must be others out there for whom same-sex attraction was their experience, but I was hopeless at statistics. So, I remember even as a student being in a sort of church about 400, 500, where I guess statistically you would expect there to be at least sort of 15 or so others around, but assuming I was the only one, and feeling quite embarrassed about it. And I think possibly dishonest as well. I sort of vaguely remember inventing the odd girlfriend in conversations. Or the fact that I once spoke to a girl, suddenly the relationship sort of escalated in my mind such that I could sort of talk about this as something much more meaningful. And I think there was a sort of lack of honesty there, which was probably, I don't know, a mixture of embarrassment and not knowing whether this would be permanent and all that kind of thing. So
I had an imaginary wife. Did you not have an imaginary wife?
How old were you?
Well, no, just when I was a student worker, I needed often in talks on relationships to sort of, to talk about, and so I invented this imaginary wife called Beryl, who clearly fictional, who was brought out to illustrate points I was making about in talks on relationships. So there we are. I mean, that's normal, isn't it? So I wasn't alone. I had my imaginary wife, Beryl.
Just do not know what to say to that.
Excellent. So for those who are still listening to this and haven't switched off in despair at the sort of craziness that you're enduring, let's try and help people. Obviously, all of us have actually gone from this position of either being scared to buy books on the subject or imagining having a wife called Beryl. But, we've gone from that point to being hopefully vaguely sensible middle-aged people who are now talking about our sexuality to the world. So how did that change come about for us. Ed, how did it change for you?
Well, I think perhaps a particularly significant moment, and actually I think I'm sitting almost where I was when this happened, was getting hold of Wes Hill's book, Washed and Waiting, and reading that and just thinking, oh, it's not just me. And the beauty of that book was it was not just me, as in somebody else had a similar sexuality to me, but also somebody else was a Christian who was seeking to live within the same framework as me, that sex is for marriage between a man and a woman, and yet also somebody that had read some of the same literature that I'd been reading and had found some of the same connections between his faith and sexuality. And I can remember being, it was one of those books which just sat down and it arrived in the post, and I opened up the first chapter. I was supposed to be doing loads of other things, and I just sat and read it in a sitting, and and I think wept with relief, actually, that it wasn't just me. And there was somebody else who was both same-sex attracted, gay, and also a Christian who wanted to live in the light of historic Bible teaching. I can just, I can remember being a life-changing moment and a life-changing book.
And Anne, for you, how did the sort of change to realise it wasn't just you take place?
It was pretty much the exact same time that I became a Christian. It was part of the process of me coming to Christ. So I was going along to church before I was a Christian, and there was a kind of student talk after one of the services, and a guy who himself was same-sex attracted but had become a Christian was sharing his story. And it's the first time I'd heard anybody who was gay or same-sex attracted but also a Christian, talking about how God loved him and how Jesus had transformed his life. So I suppose the whole it's okay to talk about being gay in the context of being a Christian kind of all happened at once. And I'd been wrestling with, is this way I feel an intrinsic part of who I am? Is it what God wants for me? I'd been wrestling with all that sort of stuff. And then, I kind of came to the point of realising that God didn't want me to have a gay relationship, but actually he wanted to offer me something much better. He wanted to offer me eternal life and forgiveness in Jesus. That all happened at once. So it was a bit of a weird, I sort of came out as gay and became a Christian, and all in the first term of university. And I joined the LGB group, didn't even have a T on it in those days, and so I sort of made friends there, and I was going out to Soho and sort of doing all that stuff, but I was also going to the Christian Union, and so it was kind of a weird mixture of cultures, really. And then I kind of didn't really feel any need to hide my sexuality at the Christian Union. And to be fair, I think I probably looked quite gay, and I just sort of, I wanted to talk to people about how I'd become a Christian, and it was a big part of that story. So yeah, everything kind of happened all at once, really. I came out as gay and out as a Christian at university. And actually, I find most Christians kind of wanted to help, even if they didn't know what to do. They might have been naive or not really understanding how to support somebody who's same-sex attracted, but pretty much everybody was kind and liked me and wanted to help me in my discipleship and help me grow in my faith. So it was a pretty positive experience for me.
I think that's what I found as well, was actually people were really good when I spoke to them. So I ended up with various friends getting to the position of thinking, gosh, this friendship is just weird because there's something fairly big in my life they don't know about, and I'm having to invent girlfriends and stuff. And just beginning to think, okay, I want to be honest with this friend. And, each time I remember the sort of 3 hours before, you would summon up the courage. I'm going to tell them, I'm going to tell them, I'm going to tell them, I'm going to walk around the block several times before I tell them. And they're sort of wondering why on earth there was sort of sweat pouring off my brow as we sort of met. But every time I spoke to somebody, by and large, they were Christians. They were really, really good. I mean, I think you're right, Anne. I think some people felt more natural talking about it than others, and that was fine. But certainly never received anything resembling hostility, and it was just hugely helpful. How different has that been, when we've had the chance to talk to others who are same-sex attracted or gay? Has that been an added benefit that I guess you've had over the years?
I can remember I mean, I had the odd situation where actually it turns out that some friends of mine who were also single and also actually in ministry were same-sex attracted themselves as well. And so it was this odd sort of new connection with people I already knew, and just lovely to expand the friendship and deepen the friendship in that way. And I suppose what's been interesting for me is finding the shared experiences, but then also finding out how different people's experience of same-sex attraction is, and how, you know, they've had similar issues, similar problems, similar challenges, have similar desires, but then also some very different ones. And I think that was probably the thing that surprised me most, is that even within the minority group that is same-sex attracted people, there are loads of different experiences and patterns of attraction and histories and challenges. And I can remember being really surprised by that, but there's no surprise. We're all uniquely knit together in our mother's womb by a God who's created us to be unique. And I can remember just being surprised by that, but also just enjoying that as well.
I agree with that, actually. It was really good. In fact, Ed was there, actually, the first time I was in a group of people who were all same-sex attracted talking together. And I remember just the kind of, it's not just me on one or two issues that came up, and that was really useful. But I think a big learning experience for me has been, my story is not going to be the same as everybody else's. So, you know, talking to those, for instance, who are married to somebody of the opposite sex, but also experience same-sex attraction, that was just an experience that I hadn't really considered possible. And again, that was just quite useful, beginning to empathise with their stories as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been massively helped by people who don't experience same-sex attraction, because I think, you know, in the early days I thought, but nobody understands, you know. I think I was a bit sort of self-pitying and thinking, you know, it's all right for you, you're straight or whatever. But actually, you know, I've had some really amazing support from people who aren't same-sex attracted. But there is something really special about finding people who do experience the same thing as you. For me, True Freedom Trust, which is an organisation that supports people with same-sex attraction, helps us to live biblically. That's been massive for me. So I got involved in that probably right at the start of becoming a Christian, and I've been along to the conferences every year and been part of support groups and things. And just finding solidarity with people who understand the struggle from the inside is massively special. I think being known and not having to explain everything is really powerful. So that's been really key for me. So yeah, just to flag up True Freedom Trust, they've got a great website, and there's lots of stories on there of other same-sex attracted people, and there are support groups around the country and online and that kind of thing. So that's a good place to go. They've been massively helpful to me, and we also have stories on our own website as well. I should mention that on the livingout.org website, we've got stories of people just like us who experience same-sex attraction lots of different ways. As we've said, everybody's got a unique story to tell, so those might be encouraging for you as well. You're listening to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality. For more stories, resources and events, visit our website at livingout.org.
So in the first part, we've told you all our stories, whether that's about same-sex attraction, inventing wives or bowls. But what we want to do in section 2 is try and offer advice to those who maybe are a little bit younger than us, maybe they're at the stage of exploring their sexuality and they're asking the "is it just me" question. So, Anne, any particular advice you'd give to somebody, I don't know, coming a little bit behind, as it were? Where can they find help and support?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably my biggest bit of advice would be don't kind of go massively public straight away. I think I'm a bit cautious about social media, and I've seen, you know, some people make sort of big announcements on social media and try to use that as a tool for processing really difficult, complex emotions. And I think what I'd say is to, you know, try and identify somebody in your life that you trust, maybe somebody who's older or wiser, that you can talk to about how you're feeling and that will walk with you through how your feelings might might change over time, somebody who won't judge you or put you in a particular box or try to label you. So, I mean, it could be somebody like a parent or a friend's parent or teacher or school counsellor, or maybe if you are part of a church or youth leader. And it may be that there are 2 or 3 people that you could just talk to in confidence, that are willing to listen to you and invest the time in you, and kind of walk with you through all this. But yeah, I'd be very cautious about sort of labeling yourself too early, or going massively public on something that's a pretty vulnerable thing, really.
We're asking the question, is it just me? I think one of the dangers is as a teenager is you start to ask the question, is this me? Is my sexuality me? Is this the big defining thing about you? And the answer is no. And actually, I was really helped by a teenager that I was experiencing same-sex attraction. I was confused by that. It wasn't a particularly positive experience in my life at the time. But I wasn't thinking this was me. I was getting on and doing loads of other things. I was building an identity in loads of other ways. And that was really helpful because it didn't become. I wasn't thinking this is me. I was thinking this is part of me. It's a bit confusing. It's a bit difficult, but it's not everything. And that helped me when I thought, is it just me? Because I wasn't just, I wasn't thinking, oh my goodness, this is everything. This is the most important thing in my life, and I've got nobody to talk about it with. I had loads of other really important things in my life which I was talking about, with people a lot because I like talking, as you know. So, and I just think that's probably just worth flagging up, is that, don't make it the big thing about you. And also just talk about issues and experiences of sexuality with other people, in the sense of, and don't presume, as perhaps society does, we talk about sexual minorities as if our experiences are totally alien to everybody else. They're not. Every teenager is, having crushes. Every teenager is experiencing unrequited love. Every teenager is trying to work out their identity. Every teenager is trying to work out what good, healthy relationships look like. And actually just having conversations with other teenagers, but as Anne said, people you trust, adults in your life, about the answers to those questions, and recognizing that your experience as somebody who may or may not be same-sex attracted, your experiences, your questions are just the same.
I agree with that. And I think it's also worth saying, if our experience of same-sex attraction feels painful at the moment, basically everybody has some aspect of life they wish were different. I think I've discovered that more as I've got older, particularly as I've become a church pastor and I talk to people. And what you discover is that pretty much everybody has something in their life that they are wrestling with and trying to work out how to live with. And so part of me would want to say, don't think, at one level same-sex attraction is different, but in a sense it's just an aspect of life that we're trying to work through. What does it mean to live with? If we're a Christian, how do we live for Jesus with this? Everybody's doing that with some aspect of their life. I think for me what was really crucial as well was learning at a reasonably early stage that the Lord could use this for good in my life. So it's funny, actually, for me, pretty much every aspect of life was going smoothly apart from my sexuality. To be honest, I would be way more obnoxious than I am if it weren't actually for my sexuality struggles and wrestles. Because, to be honest, I've been successful academically, successful in other ways, and there was this was actually the area of life that made me say, Lord, I need you. And I'm so thankful that it was actually through a sermon I heard at church, not on sexuality, but just on a kind of thorn in the flesh, the fact that we all wrestle with different stuff. And that's what the Lord uses to keep us dependent on him. That was life-changing for me, actually, and made a real difference. And again, helped me to see all of us have probably got some aspect of life that feels a bit thorn-like. It's not just me, and actually the Lord can use it for good.
And there's the game, would you rather? would you rather be same-sex attracted or? And I'm thinking, so many alternatives. I would much rather be same-sex attracted than other things that I see other people struggling with or battling with. And like you, Andy, it's partly because I've seen God take and use it in my life to bring so much good to me, and also for that what He's done in my life to flout into the lives of others as well. So, in the would you rather game, I think I would choose same-sex attraction out of so many things, above so many things, and also mainly because I've seen God take it and use it in my life, my experience of it in the life of others too.
I think because of the culture that we're in, we make sex such a big deal, and therefore we make kind of sexual struggles a big deal as well. But like you say, Ed, there's lots of people that have much harder things going on in their lives, and there are a lot of Christians who have given up way more to follow Jesus. So, I mean, I'm in a church with lots of Iranian refugees who have left their families and their homes and their culture and their jobs and everything they own to come to a country where basically they're treated terribly, and they've done all that to follow Jesus, and that's really humbling. And it makes me think, and I just got to not have sex. That's actually not, it's not the worst thing in the world, is it? There are people in prison for their faith. There are people getting martyred for their faith. I think that's a really helpful corrective when we're tempted to go, oh, woe is me, this is the hardest struggle ever. I mean, it just isn't. And, the benefits are amazing as well.
So just one last question then. How can churches help people who are asking the "is it just me" question? How can they work so that people don't feel quite so isolated? Ed, any wisdom?
Well, I think probably just sharing their own personal experiences. I mean, I can remember just really struggling at once by, just finding something years ago, just finding somebody in our church family really attractive and feeling really guilty about that. And then just talking to one of my colleagues at the time who pointed out that he too every so often found somebody of the opposite sex really attractive and found that really difficult. And it was one of these moments of, oh yeah, of course you do. And I'm not uniquely placed. This was a married guy, so this was not something he could act out on either. And I suddenly thought, oh, it's not just me. He's also having to say no to things that he wants to do. He's also having to control himself and learn to do that. And he's also finding that really painful and difficult at times. So that was just one of those moments of, oh, come on, wake up, Ed, it's not just you. And you can actually get advice and help from people who've got very different sexualities, but are in similar situations to you and have got wisdom to pass on. And I got just loads of encouragement from him in that moment, but also loads of practical sort of insight and wisdom from him too.
I think there are various things as well that churches can do. So I think it's really important that we get advice from those who are same-sex attracted and for those who aren't same-sex attracted. It's probably worth saying that some churches, perhaps larger churches, have set up groups for those who experience same-sex attraction to talk about this. There's an article on our website by Charlie Screen that talks about the group they set up. Maybe churches can cooperate with that. That can be useful, but equally would want to say we don't also want to indicate that it's only possible to help if you are same-sex attracted. There are 2 or 3 blogs that appeared on the website recently. What does good pastoral support look like? And again, the aim of those was to try and equip churches, and particularly perhaps those who aren't same-sex attracted, to have some idea as to how to assist those who are. Anne, any last things you want to add?
I'm just going to do a bit of a plug for Living Out stuff. So we have a church audit on our website, which is a downloadable list of 10 questions that church leaders or anyone in the church can go through to kind of monitor how well you're doing on creating a culture where same-sex attracted Christians can thrive. So that's one thing that I would strongly recommend. And we also do training days. So keep your eye on the website, because we do events all over the country and sometimes online and things. And yeah, we just, we have a certain amount of experience that we can pass on, and you can come to those sorts of things with your own questions as well about, how can we become a more supportive environment for same-sex attracted people. So yeah, make the most of the Living Out resources. There's always new stuff going up there. So go to livingout.org. And yeah, hopefully that will help you to be more fully equipped.
Thanks, Anne. So I guess what we're saying is that if you're in a church wanting to help people, there are loads of resources out there on the Living Out website. Also, True Freedom Trust, as Anne indicated earlier, made a big impact on her during her early years of what it was to be gay and to live as a Christian as well. And my hope is what we've picked up over the last half an hour or so is that if you're sitting there thinking, is it just me? It really isn't. There are plenty of others around who experience same-sex attraction but think Jesus is well worth living for. And if you look for it, there are plenty of avenues of support available. So thanks so much for listening. Time's up for today. Do check the website out. We've plugged it enough during this session. So do check that out. Thanks to Anne and Ed for joining me. And if you've enjoyed this, do like and subscribe to us so that you don't miss an episode. And we look forward to catching up with you again soon.